Hello, folks. Welcome again to Uncharted with Ines Franklin. Today, you're going to get to meet my friend Scott Sauls. He is the senior pastor of Christ Presbyterian Church in Nashville. I've known Scott for quite a few years, and I have so much respect for him. He's a deeply humble man, a great thinker, a deep thinker, and he's written quite a few books that I would recommend you check out. Jesus Outside the Line, From Weakness to Strength, A Gentle Answer, which is a great book about civil discourse. And he's about to come up with a new book, which he talks about on this podcast. Beautiful People Don't Just Happen. It's a beautiful book about the restoration that God can do in our lives. And what's really wonderful is he's going to tell more about his story, which I'm very excited about because he has a really powerful story and testimony about the way that God has worked in his life. So I am excited for you to meet him. Again, thank you for joining us for today's podcast, and let's give it a listen. Friends, thank you so much for joining us. This is my friend, Scott Sauls. Scott, thank you for being with us today. We're really grateful to have you.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Ines.
So,
Thanks
as you know,
for inviting me.
Oh, my goodness. And for you giving us our time. Folks, we are recording this just before Scott does the Christmas services. This is a big deal. So, as you prepare. So, we're not only going to have a conversation, but believe me, I want to pray for you as well as you prepare to deliver such powerful good news to people. So, thank you for all that you do.
Thanks, Ines.
We've been talking about the uncharted journey of faith now for a while with a lot of our listeners and some of the interviewers. And what I find interesting is a lot of times people talk about their transformation journey. That's common to hear, but a lot of times we don't talk about like the journey, the whole of the journey, not just that moment in time when we made a transformation, but the whole journey of faith. And that is like, now it may sound like it's going to be a really long story, but I think you can tell it in such a way to give us a picture of your journey and how, in a way, it's somewhat uncharted, right? That we think it's formulaic, but maybe it's not really. So can you tell us about your journey of faith, kind of how it started and where it's been, where it's going?
Sure. Thanks, Ines. So I guess I'll say that I grew up maybe kind of as an Ecclesiastes kid, right? Part of, I guess, a community that looks really together and like you have everything, and in many ways we did. I grew up with a lot of things provided for me, and all the good and all the hard that goes along with that, right? So there's this book by a woman named Madeline Levine. She's a psychiatrist who serves especially teenage population, and her book is called The Price of Privilege, and she works especially with teenagers in the San Francisco Bay Area from very affluent communities. And part of her research led her to discover that that teenagers from affluent areas are 3 times more likely than the national average to experience anxiety and depression, to experience thoughts of self-harm, and all the rest. And so I would say that in some ways describes my upbringing, where everything looked good on the outside, but I was kind of dying on the inside and had this, just strange, mysterious sense in me that there's got to be something more than this. I felt bad about myself because I didn't feel happy with all the stuff that was availed to me in my upbringing. And then I went off to college and just experienced more of that, kind of poured myself into trying to be successful as a student and as an athlete and all of that, and experienced, some good success there, but still had that nagging sense of being dissatisfied. And that was never resolved until my senior year of college when a group of friends invited me into a campus fellowship and to church with them, and I heard the message of Christ in a very vivid, very relevant way for people like me, and that's where everything clicked. That meaning and purpose and sustainable joy can only be found by being connected relationally with our Creator, and to have that nagging sense of guilt and shame that we all carry around with us resolved in this very vivid, personal way by the finished work of Christ, and so that's really where the journey with Christ for me began, was through the avenue of being very dissatisfied with things that people think should satisfy you. And to this day, the most relatable book in the Bible for me is Ecclesiastes, where you have this man who is on top of the world by every measure, and yet he says, everything's meaningless, and all of this is, he says, it's vapor. The good things that this life provides are so temporary that he describes them as like there's smoke, right? Vapor
Passing
is something
by.
that poofs. You can't hold on to it. It's going to slip out of your fingertips, right?
Yeah.
And any form of happiness that doesn't have its source and destination in God will be the experience of it. And so I came to Christ really through that existential crisis, right? And some people introducing me to Christ as the answer to that. And so, ever since then, I started pursuing a life in the ministry pretty much from the get-go when I met Christ.
Did. So it was
in
receiving that message and saying, okay, I'm going to pursue this be as a career.
Yeah. And the crazy thing about it, Ines, was I was terrified of public speaking. And, I was a good student all the way growing up, except in 3 subjects. Driver's ed. I was so nervous that I ran stop signs and, got bad grades because of that. The other 2 subjects that I just did really poorly in are the things that I do professionally now.
Wow.
Writing and speaking.
Isn't that amazing?
And so that's just the sense of humor that God has, I suppose. But and when I kind of started that path toward the ministry, those 2 things hadn't resolved, right? I was still I got writer's block every time I tried to write, and I was terrified of speaking in front of people. And over time, the Lord worked that out. But, thankful looking back, that was 34 years ago when all that happened. So I couldn't be more grateful for the life that God's given me since.
That's amazing. So before you heard the gospel expressed in this way, had you grown up in any kind of a Christian background or anything?
No, actually, my father was a bit disappointed in my newfound faith, and that's not to disparage my father as much as it is to highlight that he was one of those people that had a very bad church experience growing up. You could say that he grew up with some church hurt. There's a lot of talk these days about church hurt, and this is
been going on for a while.
Yeah,
it's not a new thing.
It has, and so it was a very legalistic, shaming kind of introduction to God, which really is an indication that he wasn't really introduced to who God really is, if that's the picture that he got. Yeah. But he just, he left home and went off to college and said, that's not for me. And so, he was comfortable with me, being a little bit religious, but when I started talking about, a life in ministry, that's when he got really nervous. And then my mom was afraid that I was going to be poor, and they had this whole image. But ever since then, that's all been resolved, and they're thankful that I've taken the path that I've taken, and married the person that I married, and I'm in the life that I'm in and the calling that I'm in. But yeah, didn't grow up with I grew up with the opposite of church and God and everything else.
Yeah. Awesome. Now, how has that upbringing, having that church hurt from your father, to go from that, seeing your dad experience that pain, to you being now a pastor of a church, right? How did that inform the way that you pastor, the way that you lead a church?
Oh, thank you. That's a great question. Our stories always shape the way we respond to people around us, don't they?
Yes.
I think that it's made me, Ines, especially sensitive to people who, look like they have it together, but they're dying inside. Thoreau talks about how the mass of men lead quiet lives of desperation, Thoreau said. And that, of course, includes men and women and kids, per Madeline Levine's research. And so, God's always seemed to have put me in similar environments to the one that I grew up in. And, whether it's, the urban center of New York City with, Wall Street folks and kind of global influencers and others. And I can remember actually when I was there, and I started preaching, Ines, and I sat down with Tim Keller, who was, my mentor at the time, and graciously, brought me onto the teaching team there. And I just remember talking to him how intimidating it felt to me to preach to all of these really successful people, some of them really well known. Most of them with degrees from universities that I wouldn't have been able to get into, coming out of high school. Yeah. Because I goofed around in high school. But he says, here's the thing. You're intimidated by the fact that you're in a room full of experts, but they're all here because they feel a need for your expertise. And, your expertise and my expertise is that we've found the secret of contentment. And that's the thing that plagues successful people is that you think, like enough? Thomas Merton, said, I spent my whole life, climbing the ladder of success only to reach the top and realize I've been climbing up the wrong wall. And so, Tim said, don't ever underestimate the power of the gospel in anyone's life, and that's what you bring is access to the secret of contentment through the message of Christ and the gospel. And so I'm like, okay, and I think really that was a turning point for me, that I can have confidence, stepping into any space where I am, asked to talk about Christ, because the need for Christ, including the real need and the felt need for Christ, is universal. It's everywhere. It's among the poor, the material poor, who are also poor in spirit because of their circumstances, as well as the materially affluent who realize that their affluence hasn't gotten them anywhere on the road of happiness, on the road to happiness. That only Christ can do that. And so, I don't know. I think that experience has been a big. It was a big turning point of just being able to own, this treasure that Christ has given you and has given me, and us to be able to communicate it to people, which has turned out to be one of the greatest privileges I could have ever imagined getting to be part of. And
in a way, you were so well equipped for it. You can see God's brilliance bringing you someone who felt like, again, it's all relative, right? At least you felt like you had it all and it was not enough. And those people in the room probably felt that way to whatever degree they have a lot, right? But you could still reach that place no matter how much you have. And that place of like, this isn't enough. And so you could speak from a place of knowledge and a heart of compassion, because you know how, from your father perhaps, I'm thinking that you knew how sometimes these messages can be positioned in such a way where they do more harm than good if it's not done well, right? Yeah. So, now, being that you've been on the journey of faith now, you said 35 years, 34 years? It's not like we're trying to calculate your age or anything. I've stopped doing the math. You know this. You turn 40, which I'm long past 40. You stop doing the math on how many years ago this or that was. That's right. But, you've been on this journey of faith for a while. And as a pastor, you're walking with people on their journey of faith. And so hopefully you can feel comfortable sharing about your own struggles through it, because, I believe we all do. We all go through struggles. And the journey of faith isn't linear, isn't always up and perfect. There's these bumps along the way. And so often we don't talk about them. So I'm curious, how has the journey of faith been mysterious for you? And where has it been maybe not what you expected?
So, you're a pastor. You understand this, Ines. There's certain things that they just didn't train us for in seminary.
A lot.
And one of which was they didn't spend a whole lot of time, teaching us how to lead, right? They taught us how to learn the Bible and to preach and emphasize the importance of integrity, which I think are the main things, to their credit. But they didn't at least back then, and I think it's different. Like Fuller out, closer to where you live, they do a great job, training people in leadership in ways that maybe other seminaries have struggled to do so. The other thing that they didn't train us for was how hurtful Christians can be toward one another. That's been really, I think, probably the hardest, most mysterious thing to navigate, is that, again, back to Tim Keller, this is a conversation we had, probably 15 years ago about, why is it that conflict between Christians, it almost feels like people are more mean than they are in conflict between non-Christians. And it seems like it should be the opposite, right? It seems like Christian conflict should not get so ugly, and sometimes it does. And that's just not just true today. It's true in the Bible.
Yes, Corinthians.
Paul just in his letters talks so much about how people are biting and devouring each other. And, when he writes to the young pastor Timothy, he talks about how there are people in the churches who crave controversy and quarrels. It's not just that they have controversy, they actually want it. They're looking for it.
They're
looking for a fight. And I'm just like, that's one of the most mysterious things in the world, of how people have been loved the way that we have, and we've been made aware of that love that Christ, was willing to not take offense at our offenses and absorb it, and yet how unwilling we are sometimes to absorb those offenses, and yet at the same time, in a mysterious way, to use that word, it's a great reminder that even though our love toward one another can be so fickle, the love of Christ just holds. It holds steady. It never retreats. It never becomes less. I just think about when Peter betrays Christ 3 times, and Peter was never less loved or less held or less kept by Christ, even at his very worst. Right. And so, in a sense, that is the mystery that Christ never stops loving us, which is even more mysterious about how than it is how little we can love one another sometimes. And that strange thing about Christians isn't just around me, it's also in me, Ines. There's so many times.
I was going to say the same thing. I was thinking, I sometimes feel like, shouldn't I be further along here? I've been at 100%. This for a while. Isn't this Holy Spirit living in me? Why do I still have this problem? So 100%. I agree. Yes.
And the beautiful thing too is when we feel that about ourselves, it probably means that on some level people are experiencing us in a better way than they used to if we're self-aware.
I hope so.
I think that's when Christians become kind. The more self-aware we are, the more kind we are. And I think when we start, kind of snipping at each other, which has, happened a lot in the last couple of years with COVID and politics and all that. Yeah. It's been a lot uglier, in my opinion, inside the church in some ways than it has been outside the church, sadly. Yeah. But but I think it has a lot more to do with amnesia than it does with anything else, where we forget, how much we need grace and patience and kindness extended to us, not just by others, but by God. And when we realize that God has come through with that for us, it has a humbling effect. And so, maybe that's why Augustine, when he was asked what are the top 3 virtues of Christianity, he said humility, humility, and humility. And so if we can stay in that humble place and stay low and realize, how deep the Father's love is for us because of how deeply he had to go into our mess in order to redeem us. Hopefully that'll keep us in that humble place, and we'll become a lot more kind.
Yeah. So
there are a lot of really amazingly kind Christians as well, as you and I both know.
Indeed. But obviously, one of the mysteries of the journey of faith is people themselves, ourselves, and the people, right? Because we don't operate linearly. We do meander. We do forget. We do act in a way that isn't really how God would want us to act, or even the way that demonstrates how we are embracing the love that God has for us. Yeah. And so people have a mystery, but sometimes there's a mystery in the way that God works in our lives too, right? I mean, there's a sense, I think we want to figure out God. We want to know him. Of course, that's a good thing in my mind. It's imperative that we seek to know him. But then when we think we have him figured out and we have him in a box and we want him to operate a certain way, it removes the mystery of God. How have you experienced the mystery of God in your journey?
I mean, I can go 100 different directions with that one, Ines. But,
it's too broad.
As I was, thank you, by the way, for sending some of these questions ahead of time.
Yeah, no.
But the one that popped into my head as I was contemplating the questions before our call is that you can take any section of Scripture and you can read it 150 times. And it can be just as fresh and just as new the 150th time as it was the first time, because the same words, it's almost like a paragraph in Scripture has an inexhaustible amount of things to tell us as the Holy Spirit reveals that, the depth of that paragraph to us over the course of years in our lives, if that makes sense. Like I listen to my sermons from 20 years ago, and I just think, oh my goodness, there's so much I missed 20 years ago that I understand now about this one passage of Scripture, which then is a great reminder that there's probably still so much I'm missing now.
Yes.
And so that's just part of the mystery, is that there's always more to look forward to of what God is going to reveal to us and uncover to us in, what the Bible itself calls the inexhaustible riches of his truth.
Or Paul says, right? Who can know the mind of God?
Yes.
There's so much.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
What's your answer to that?
I think it's wonderful that God's mysterious. I think we need to embrace it and love it, because then he becomes so much bigger than everything we have here. I think for me, and I do this, I'm not saying, it's everyone else. I do it too. Sometimes I want God to be predictable and operate on my terms. And I may not think it exactly that way literally, but I see it in my actions. Like I'll see the way in which I am having expectations of God, or how I'm showing in my disappointment, or, my emotions sometimes reveal, oh, wow, I was having God operate under these terms instead of who he really is. And in so doing, we miss out on who he is. I think that's the case when we have relationships with others. When we have an expectation of how people operate, we limit our ability to grow in our knowledge of them and our intimacy with them, because we stop growing. We stop discovering. So, I got a friend of mine who just said the other day, he says, we're either moving forward or moving backwards. And, the more we press in and lean in to those, places where God shows up, in the Scripture, in the life of the local church, in community with others who are heading in the same direction with God, the more we can move forward. And,
learning, and having these mysteries about God revealed to us over time.
Yes. Now you're writing a new book coming up. I'm excited. Mm-hmm. And so it's a book about transformation. So again, I'm thinking, right, if I'm understanding the cover, at least that's all I saw was the cover, which is beautiful, by the way.
Thank you.
But in a way, it's transformation is this beautiful picture of something new coming out, right? Something being revealed or made anew. And so, I feel like this is a perfect time to segment into your book. Tell us about this book and how and what prompted you to write it. And right now at this time.
Ines. So it's already written. It's been in the publisher's hands for a little while now. It comes out in early June, and the title is "Beautiful People Don't Just Happen," and the subtitle probably tells the story of the book, better than the table of contents would.
Well done.
And the subtitle is How God Redeems Regret, Hurt, and Fear in the Making of Better Humans. And so it's really about it's about how God takes those messy, nerve-wracking, anticlimactic, disappointing aspects of being human, and actually uses those parts of our lives as the primary theater, as the primary stage where he does his best work in our lives, in our communities, in the world. There's always some form of disappointment, disorientation, trauma, pain that births goodness into the world. I mean, it's the pattern of Christ's life, right? Life, death, burial, resurrection, glory.
Yes.
And that's the pattern of creation, where we talk about the arc of redemption, creation, fall, redemption, glory, etc. And our lives are also microcosms of that. And so it really is an effort to encourage people to understand, both about ourselves and about others, that a damaged person is not a done person. In fact, the beginning of fruitfulness in our lives might actually be when we feel like the fruitfulness of our lives is over. And that actually might be the beginning. So it's a hopefully it's really accessible. It's probably the most personal book I've written.
I was going to ask that. So it has your story?
Yeah. I get into a lot of my own story and
beautiful.
my inner, the inner workings of my heart, and, the messiness that's there, and the goodness of God that, works in the mess. So it's kind of my own, it's inspired by, I would never put it in the same league as, but it's inspired by, if you've ever heard a book called The Ragamuffin Gospel by Brennan Manning.
Yes.
So that book was, I think, what inspired me to write this kind of book. And so it's probably my most transparent work. And so I hope it'll help some people.
Thank you. Thank you for your vulnerability and your willingness to put yourself out there like that. Again, as a pastor and as a leader, oftentimes, sometimes it's tempting to protect ourselves. Because there's so much hurt that can happen when we're honest with our own journeys. And so really grateful for you sharing that. When you wrote that book, obviously since it's filtered through your own journey of faith, did you talk at all about God, like is he the source of some of these challenges and therefore he makes good use of them? Is he a God who doesn't waste any of these challenges? And he talk about the cause and effect, or, that sort of thinking, because I do believe for some people, suffering, loss, failure can often be blamed on God, right? when we say God can use these things to do the most beautiful work, then the natural question is, well, then did God cause this?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, that's one of the greatest, speaking of the word mystery, it's one of the greatest mysteries in the universe, right?
Yes.
We've got a God who is in control of everything. He's all powerful. He's omnipotent. And he's a God of love. And so how do we account for tragedy and pain and death and sorrow? And of course, the theological answer to that is when sin came into the world, it tarnished everything. It created this condition of decay for every person, every place, and everything in the universe. Now, that still begs the question, who started it, all of that, and I'm not qualified to answer that question, but one of the scriptures that I interact with in the book is Romans 8:28, which is often used as kind of an insensitive Band-Aid to somebody else's deep pain, right? Like
Very true.
we become, like Job's miserable counselors, where we just kind of slap a Bible verse on somebody else's pain in order to feel better.
Yeah.
And yet, God works all things together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose is absolutely true for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And so in the book, I talk especially about that word together, right? Where it says God works all things together for good. And, if you think about my favorite pastry, it's banana bread. And
with nuts or without?
I love that they call it bread, so that you can think you're eating bread instead of cake.
But do you like it with the nuts in them or not?
That's right. I mean, it really is cake.
Okay.
It's cake, right? But they call it bread, so I love that they, make you feel a little bit better by naming it that. It feels healthier than it is. Sounds healthier than it is. But here's the secret ingredient to banana bread, which I think provides a good picture. It's a rotten banana. It's not just a banana.
Oh, I've never made it.
It has to be
really?
rotten. Yes, you have to leave the banana out until it becomes, black. The skin becomes black, and then you peel it, and it's nasty, right? You would never put it in your mouth. It would probably make you sick if you ate it by itself. And yet, that rotten banana is the magic ingredient that brings out the flavor and creates the moisture in banana bread that make it what it is. But it's not by itself. It works together with the salt and the flour and the eggs and the other ingredients that go in with it, right? And so,
wow.
So I think that's a picture. Let's just say our suffering is like the rotten banana in our lives. Wherever it came from, that banana or that suffering is an ingredient that God repurposes, right? Yeah. The Bible talks about what Satan and what ill-intended people mean for evil, God turns it into good,
yes,
right?
Praise God.
And so our suffering is an ingredient that is there, that God makes the best of, right? So I used to have, there's this guy in our church before they moved, and he was a master chef at a restaurant. Like, this is the kind of person who could turn a can of Chef Boyardee into a 5-star meal. I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but he could take anything and turn it into a delicious masterpiece. And I think that's a picture of what God is like. He can take any ingredient, any raw material, and turn it into a masterpiece, right? I mean, our lives are like that, right? We're sinful people. We're broken. We're damaged. We're dying. And God is turning us into, C.S. Lewis's Weight of Glory paints a great picture of this. Like if you were to see any of us in our future state, you would be tempted to get on your knees and worship.
Yes.
Because of where God's taking our messy lives, right? And so whether or not God is the one who, orchestrates suffering, causes it, allows it, we know two things. Number one, he hates it.
Right.
He doesn't want it for us. I mean, Jesus weeps at the tomb of his friend Lazarus. He gets angry at the tomb of his friend Lazarus, not at Lazarus, not at the people mourning, but at death itself. He's angry because death and suffering do vandalism against human beings, and he loves human beings. So we know that. He hates suffering, he's against it, and he fights it, and he will ultimately end it. Yeah. And mysteriously, that word again, one of the ingredients that God uses to produce that glory and greatness, for the future of his children, and even in the present, is our suffering. So in Romans 5, same book, right, as Romans 8:28, where it says we rejoice in our sufferings. It doesn't say we rejoice over our sufferings, like we don't like our sufferings, we don't enjoy them, but in them and through them, we rejoice because suffering will produce perseverance, which will produce character, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Comes through suffering. I mean, that's a botanical metaphor, right? Where when God talks about character, he talks about fruit. Yes. And fruit only, optimizes on the tree or the bush when the branches are pruned, and when it goes through seasons of dormancy through the wintertime, which you in California maybe wouldn't experience dormancy as much.
Never heard of that.
But right, like our grass right now looks dead in Ness, but it's not dead. It's dormant, and in the spring it's going to come alive in this plush green, reality, and God's producing that character and hope, which promises a future that C.S. Lewis describes in such a wonderful way, where he says, heaven will work backward and turn even our agony into a glory. And he goes on to say that because we suffered so much in this area or that area, it will only serve to amplify the joy when the suffering is eliminated. It's like waking up from a nightmare, right? Like let's say you lose your favorite loved one in a nightmare, and then you wake up and there they are,
straight to hug them.
Celebrating Christmas morning, and you're that much more appreciative of them, having had the nightmare than you would never having had the nightmare, because you've gotten them back from something that was terrible. And so I think suffering is going to work like that eventually our experience of very real suffering in this life is going to be experienced as a nightmare that we've been awakened from in glory. And so that's beautiful. A lot. It's a lot more than you asked.
No, this is good. And you cover some of this in your book, it sounds like.
Yes, the book is all about that.
Awesome. Do you get into, in Romans 8:28, where it says God works out together, all things for the good, singular good, which is then expressed in the next verse, which is to be made into the image of a son. Do you cover that in the book?
In a manner of speaking, yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's not a book on Romans 8, but it includes, those themes are interwoven throughout.
Because part of the reason I bring that up is because I think sometimes this mysterious nature of our journey of faith, this uncharted journey that includes suffering, is producing in us the fruit, right? Is actually molding us and creating us, chiseling away, right, our brokenness, and making us more and more beautiful in the image of Christ. And I think that's what the two passages together, they say that. I think sometimes what happens is we pull one off on its own. And we miss the beautiful thing that God's doing in us.
That's right.
Yes.
Context is part of text.
Yes.
Somebody told me once.
I like that. That. Well, I can't wait to read your book. Thank you, Scott, for pouring yourself. Like you said, writing is not something that you saw yourself doing or something you had to learn to do. Well, you've learned well. God has definitely made you into a writer. I've enjoyed every one of your books. I have them all in my library. And
thank you,
I encourage people to read them. Because you're so wise and you're so thoughtful in what you do. And I'm excited that you're going to share your journey on this as well. Pretty cool.
Thank you.
Pretty cool.
Very kind, Ines. Very mutual.
Well, I'm still trying to write my first one. My goodness, I'm working on it. I'm trying to release it this next year. So, pray for me.
If it's anything like you teach, it's going to be good.
You're so kind. Thank you.
Look forward to that.
Well, for our listeners, as we close, those who might feel on this journey of faith maybe discouraged or distant from God, or maybe worse yet, maybe a sense of apathy on their journey of faith. All of this, I go back from one of the books I read on the spiritual journey that refers to it as a wall. These people who might feel that they're standing before a wall on their journey of faith and they don't know how to get through this wall. What word of encouragement would you give them from your years of experience as a pastor, but also on your own journey of faith?
A couple of things. I mean, one, this is the great news. We move away from God all the time, but he never moves away from us. And so, he's just as there with us and for us in those dry, apathetic, disoriented seasons as he is when we're on a mountaintop. He never leaves us, never forsakes us. That's a promise. It's like it says in the Psalms, his goodness and his mercy follow us all the days of our lives. And so even if we're running in another direction, he's following us. We can't get away. It's like that children's book, The Runaway Bunny. Great, kind of illustration of God's pursuing love. So even when we're in those seasons, he's not budging. He's not distancing himself from us. As we talk right now, the new year's around the corner, and a lot of people are going to be kind of reassessing their lives like we do at the end of the year and the beginning of a new one. And so maybe even from that dry, apathetic place, you want something different. You want something more than what is. And, the great news is wherever you've left off or maybe where you never picked up in the first place, you can always start now. Without any guilt or shame or regret, you can always start now. You don't have to make up for lost time. You just begin again today. His mercies are new every day. He gives us a reset every morning when we wake up. And, the encouragement that I would offer is, like, let's say you're one of those people that are like, you know what, I'm going to get back in the Bible and I'm going to get back in the church next year. And I want to say those are probably two of the greatest, smartest, wisest, best decisions that you can make if you really want to get out of an apathetic funk. You're not created to walk with God by yourself. Nobody is created to do that. And you're not created to walk with God without God's word. And so if you could make the simple commitment, whether you feel like it or not, just like you did studying because you wanted the grade, right? Even when you didn't feel like studying, you wanted to go to a party or you wanted to sleep, but you studied instead because you had a goal in mind. So let's say your goal is flourishing. You want to flourish. You don't want to be apathetic anymore. You don't want to be bored with things that matter anymore. Do two things. Be fully present with the local church every single week, unless you're sick. But even then, now you can be present online. But don't be online. We can be in person and when it's safe. Be fully present with the local church every single week, and have a smaller group of people that you can process, church life with and sermons and stuff. And be fully present with Jesus every single day with the Scripture. Here's the promise that we have from Scripture about itself. That the gospel is power. It is the power of God. Even when we don't feel powerful as we take in the Scriptures, there is a power that's at work that God assures us is there. I know Dallas Willard is from your state, right? And he's a big spiritual formation guy, right? Yes. And spiritual formation is just all about rhythms. It's we become what we commit ourselves to. And so if my primary commitment is to get through a Netflix series at least once a week, I'm going to be formed by that. I'm going to be shaped like that, by that. If my commitment is to be formed in the likeness of Christ and I do all these things, if I develop the rhythms of my life around work and Sabbath and life in a local church and taking in scripture and meaningful spiritual conversations with fellow Christians, and, engaging meaningfully with my city, with my work, with my neighbors, by loving them well, as the scriptures direct me to do. Over time, I'm going to be formed into a flourishing person in the same way that eating healthy and exercising on a regular basis, whether I feel like it or not, over time, it will start to feel more natural and more motivational over time. And I will find myself becoming more healthy when I eat more fish than I do burgers, and when I exercise more than I watch, binge, Netflix or scroll through social media, right? It's just a fact that health happens through rhythms and it works the same way with spiritual life, just as well as it does friendship between people, right? It has to be nurtured and cultivated, and eventually it starts to become second nature. But that initial investment,
take the time,
of the healthy rhythms has to happen first.
Beautiful. That's actually quite timely as we begin the year. So thank you. Thank you for that word of encouragement. Folks, I hope this has blessed you. It's blessed me to have this conversation with Scott. He's a dear friend, someone I respect so much. I could sit here and talk forever. So do check out his website, scottsauls.com, right? And check out his books, listen to his sermons, learn from this incredibly humble and intelligent man. I think you will be blessed. And again, thank you, Scott. Thank you for this time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ines.
Well, Andy, I really enjoyed speaking with Scott. What a gracious man to take the time to be with us in this conversation. Again, I have so much respect for him and for what he does, for his work, the writing. I can't believe a senior pastor can put out this many books, first of all. It blows my mind. He's got a very busy church. He preaches a lot. He is involved with Q Ideas. That's actually how I met him. I met him through Gabe Lyons, through the Q Ideas conference. I actually heard him speak multiple times, and I thought, man, I like how you think. And really how gracious he is, and so honest with his own journey, which is why I'm excited about his new book coming up. Now, in this conversation, as we were having this discussion about the mystery of faith, I was very interested to hear how he experienced it. And it dawned on me, this is one thing I knew about Scott, but I had forgotten until he brought it up, is that he did grow up, and he admits that he grew up with a place of privilege, and that actually caused him some pain. I don't think we hear about those stories much, right? I mean, we hear stories of people who did not have privilege, and therefore there's a pain. And so those are voices that are very loud right now. But we don't hear a lot of voices of when it happens from someone who comes from privilege and is in struggles in that. So I was grateful that he shared a little bit about that. I thought it was refreshing to hear from that perspective. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I actually do have a lot of thoughts about that. Because personally, while I might not consider myself like a person of affluence in that way, I lived very much of a middle class Orange County life. That being said, middle class Orange County is affluent, massively globally speaking. Yes. And secondly, nationwide, it's also affluent therefore. Yeah. So I think that's even just a good self-reflection and awareness piece of as much as I might not have thought about my upbringing as being affluent, while I didn't live a contextually affluent life compared to maybe my peers or other people around me, or I could look at places like Newport Beach and all these other places. I say that because growing up, going to the beach all the time, it was everyone drives Ferraris and BMWs. I mean, you saw that level of big material affluence. Whereas I felt like I was scrappy in the way that I experienced the way that I was raised and the things that I did. But overall, in a bigger conversation, I think grew up in a place of affluence and definitely had a spiritual crisis. And in my case, though, I can probably relate that more to feelings of indifference for the color of my skin related to like my own, a lot of the other things, like also being really short growing up amidst people who aren't. I mean, it's interesting how much that does affect your sense of belonging, your sense of being liked, your sense of like normality. There's a lot of that plays into young people's lives and how they view the world and how they think that they're viewed in the world. And so, my spiritual crisis was very much like a combination of almost recognizing privilege and then being someone who didn't necessarily benefit from it amidst like an affluent context. And I've shared this on the show before as it relates to, one of my friends who was a pastor's kid, who everyone thought he was kind of like the greatest thing in the world. And Scott kind of talked about this on the outside, how everything looks perfect. And yet on the inside, there's all this stuff going on. And I kind of had a window into his life that was outside of all of our church life, in which I'm like, this kid is chaos. It's like, in fact, he's like a leader of chaos, like at our school and the things that he does and in our friend groups. I mean, it's like, it's not at all what the adults around me and the Christian adults around me think of him. And so that began to instigate a spiritual crisis, because it was like, I'm sorry, this is supposed to be the teenage image of what Jesus is supposed to look like, when I can clearly testify that like, there is a duality here that is not lined up. And so that began to just kind of completely disrupt a lot of like my kind of then faith upbringing in that kind of sense, so this is all of my around starting at the age of probably 13, going all through high school, observing all of this until end of high school, where then like my trust of like organized religion, as I called it at the time, did not seem to provide the benefits and the promises that it seemed to offer. And so, which was really kind of the crux of my probably earliest, phase of deconstruction, if you will, with all of that. And so, I thought that is an interesting note. We don't hear about those stories as much. And, because I think that requires, you guys did talk about this, it requires a certain amount of self-awareness.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, and I think that what you guys mentioned, but that was connected to your guys' dialogue about the question of like why as Christians do we seem meaner and harder on each other, kind of in our current society. If we have theological disagreements, we're not on the same aisle of theology or whatever, where we kind of expect that we should be being meaner to non-Christians, or it seems we're more gracious to non-Christians. But it's funny. I thought that was an interesting conversation, because in the way that a marriage is a hard one for me. In my mind, I was kind of connecting it to that. But the way I see it is that like I think the gospel gives us the opportunity to be a blessing and offer and mimic kindness to stranger and to the non-Christian. So in a way, I'm kind of like, does it then seem like we're doing what we're supposed to be doing if that it seems like we're actually kinder to non-Christians than not, versus we actually have grounds to hold each other accountable as Christians and draw us through the tensions that help us arrive at then our reflection of what Jesus should look like in society. So I almost don't have a problem as much that we might have very large public disagreements from Christian to Christian, because I think we do need to air out some of those big differences and kind of work through those types of things. And I think it's okay that they happen in the secular public sometimes. So I think we need that outside eye to see the things in the blind spots that maybe we don't.
But I don't know that we should ever not be kind to one another. So I do agree that we should hold each other accountable, and it is biblical. Paul talks about it. We shouldn't be judging those outside. They're not putting their faith in Jesus, but we should judge our brother and sister in a sense that we hold each other accountable. But nowhere does he say don't be kind, right?
Right.
And especially when we take it to a civil discourse, kindness is even more important, because when you're opening it up for outsiders to hear that conversation that's really oftentimes should be a one-on-one or small group conversation in the intimacy of trust and a willingness to hear someone's heart. The minute you make it public, I think you have to be much kinder, because I think we're now modeling kindness, not just being kind to others, but we're modeling kindness, and we don't do a really good job at that, I don't think,
Yeah. I would definitely get behind and advocate kindness no matter what.
Yeah.
And at the same time, though, I think I do feel good about about acknowledging, like, you know, that some of these big argumentative topics, like, you know, can be held publicly. I mean, they were. I mean, that's the thing. It's like in a very Jewish, Roman, you know, controlled culture, much of these conversations were public conversations. You know, it was ways of
many of Jesus's were conversations were public, right? On the public square.
Totally, 100%.
Yep.
So,
And sometimes not so nice.
Yeah, and sometimes not so nice, and that's the thing. Like, obviously, there's a lot of subjectivity to how we observe, like, niceties and kindness and respect and all of those kinds of things. And there's a lot of, like, cultural cultural aspects we have to remember and keep as important and contextual to that type of thing. But as I think we're saying, what Jesus has presented us with through the gospel is that, you know, kindness is actually this vehicle for expressing respect and love. And so it's that if we really believe that we're shaped in that way and that is a fruit of our life, then, like, you know, we're going to be able to have these conversations well. And I agree, there is a lot of unkind things that are happening generally in our culture. And yes, it is a bit, it's disappointing when we do see it happen, you know, for those of us that believe the same things. But again, like, I think the idea that, like, oh, well, it should be the opposite. We should see the most kindness expressed to Christian versus, like, from those two outside the church. I'm like, I would say that's not theologically true. Yeah. So that, so I thought that was just
we're in agreement there. Exactly. You know, I was thinking, if you can't say what you're saying publicly to a person face to face, that's the test, you know, because I do think we take on liberties when we're doing these things, you know, especially via social media, and that this connection that allows us to say things that, honestly, I don't think some of these people talk like that in person to someone. I have a hard time believing they do. They wouldn't have a single friend.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. I think the data has proven that it's just the human interaction face to face looks significantly different than what social media has shown us over time. And so, that's very true. And that's a great, you know, conversation for later, for advocating, like, what happens in real relationship, or real, like, kind of like the actual human touch interaction point, and what makes that different versus just reading each other's identity through the alphabet.
Yes, very true.
Through what's typed on a screen, right?
Exactly. So, now, the other conversation we had was about the mystery of faith. And, you know, I feel like in my conversation with Scott, he acknowledged, obviously, that there is a mystery of faith. And because it's a mystery, it's very hard to define. It's hard to give it language. But I believe that we agreed together that there is a mystery on this journey, and that maybe we have been too reliant on formulas for this journey of faith. And I've been reflecting more on that conversation. I've been thinking a lot about the world we live in now, all the complexity that we're living in, how it's evolving into higher and higher complexity. We're deeply connected worldwide, which means that we have access to the crises that happen thousands of miles away, the faith journeys that people are having thousands of miles away, the good things that are happening, all these things we are deeply connected with. So everything is much harder to put into a single formula or a simple way to viewing things. And one of them is the journey of faith. So when we are living out our faith with access to hundreds, if not thousands, of pastors online, and podcasts and books and different opinions through all the different social medias, as we just talked about, how people are openly sharing all these kinds of thoughts, it immediately becomes a greater mystery, right? Because we're being exposed to so many different ideas, experiences, reflections, and it's natural to feel a little bit lost on this journey unless you close yourself out altogether. And I do think that's sometimes what people do. They go, okay, well, I'm not going to listen to anything. I'm just going to close myself out. And anyway, that was one of the reflections I've been having about that. I was grateful that he acknowledged that as a pastor of a Presbyterian church, which obviously can be a little bit more Calvinistic and right. And he acknowledged there is a mystery. Yeah, I was grateful for that.
Yeah. I think some of the wisest advice I've received, like usually comes from those where instead of answering a question directly, their response is more of an anecdote from experience and observance. And Jesus is like this,
True.
right? You know, it's just if Pharisees asked him a question, or even his own disciples asked him a question, I mean, like, unless it was a very kind of clairvoyant, like kind of poignant, like, you know, this is what's going to happen if you chase that rabbit, you know, it's like that. And there was a couple of those, you know, but the larger like narrative is the extension of like, you have agency of thought. Like he gave a lot of agency even to the Pharisees and even to the disciples. Like, think about this, you know this, and yet there's something else here, you know, and it's just, and he would, and even then extend prophecy to reveal it. It's like that is yet to be known, or that is yet to come. There's, you know, a lot of those different things. And so Jesus himself was even presenting mystery as a response to questions, you know. It was never like that amount of certainty was never offered. It's just, we reflect back and see everything he did as the most final and most certain thing that could have ever been done. And I do think that's true in some cases. So however, though, I think to your point that it can be exhausting and depressing to think about all the minutia and complexity of like that global extension of communication, right? Because I think as very communicable human beings, more communication does not equal higher value of life. You know, it's how we communicate, or clarity. It's usually how we communicate with whom we actually communicate with that seems to produce the most fruit in life. And so that's where we still have agency and selectivity of how we go about that kind of process. And I've never been one to be very reductive. It's just that I think, like, even in the words of Jesus of like, you know, when you're asking the question of like, who am I supposed to love and how am I supposed to do it? He reminds us that you'll always have, you know, the widows, the children, you know, and those that are downtrodden and the homeless. It's just like, these will always be among you. Like, there's no, almost like, this isn't going away.
Yeah.
You know, the burden of realization of the hardships of the world are not going away. This is the design of a fallen and broken world, you know, but yet, like, you are called to be kind, you know, to love, you know, to offer patience where patience shouldn't be offered, to offer grace where it shouldn't be offered. I mean, all of these types of things is it's how we do those things that are obviously nuanced and have their complexities. But I think that the invitation to do those things is actually pretty clear. Yeah. And so it's pretty easy, though, to stack ourselves with all of that and make it too hard on ourselves. And I think the beautiful mystery for me is always wondering, if I love this thing when maybe I shouldn't, or it's really hard to, what could come out of it? Mm-hmm. You know, that's like, to me, that's the most exciting part of the journey, is being tested by those circumstances and recognizing those things versus just knowing for sure, well, if I do this, that's what's going to happen. Yeah. I'm more disappointed when I go into a situation believing that versus here is an outrageous opportunity to love, to show kindness, to show generosity. And I'm very curious as what's going to happen if I do that.
Yeah, I do think that there is a positive of the mystery as well, or even the complexity, and that is that it drives us to a deeper dependence on God. And for example, there are many times where I think Jesus did make things more mysterious or even harder to accept, right? There were some things people would say, this is a hard saying, this is really hard to accept. But that kind of leaned people towards him. And I think it leans us closer to God, and depending on, again, because it's not complex to him. He is sovereign overall. And so there is a beauty when we open up ourselves to see the bigger picture and allow ourselves to be a little uncomfortable so that we can be more dependent, because we tend to be highly independent, I think, and that is one of our human brokenness, that we tend to break away from God and try to not depend on him. So in one way, I feel like the mystery of the journey of faith, even the mystery of Scripture, which Scott and I talked about, how he said, you know, every time I read it, I see more. That mystery makes us keep coming back for more dependency, for more intimacy, for more understanding, which I think is a good thing. I think if we have it figured out, we don't need God. We don't need the Bible. We don't need, right? We have it figured out.
Yeah. Of course. Mm-hmm. Yep, of course. So, really, really grateful for that conversation with you and Scott.
Well, okay. Hey, and I will never see banana bread the same, because now I know how it's made.
That's right.
Finishing with that. But in fact, Kaylee taught me how to make pancakes with oatmeal and bananas. And we use also a very ripe banana. And it totally makes sense how something that would normally go in the trash can make something beautiful. And that is one thing I'm super grateful for, that God does make beautiful things out of us. So closing in that, thank you, Andy, for this time of reflection. Thanks again, friends, for joining us for this podcast. I look forward to our next conversation. And in the meantime, may the peace and grace of Jesus Christ be with you today and all week long. God bless you.